Good afternoon. So you guys made it through 2 sessions for the day. This is the third. Happy to have you. Thank you. Today we are going to be talking about our friend BYOD. Theme throughout the presentation, we are privileged. Very excited. Dan from Pixar will be joining us to talk about a series of events that have happened over the past 6-7 years and kind of how they got into a spot where they're supporting a full BYO solution. And he's going to talk through the project, the things to look out for, things to plan for, and kind of how things turned out in the end. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce Dan.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Jake. I guess this thing is on, okay? Well, we're going to talk about BYOD. I'm going to tell you a story. Story is king at Pixar. So what we'll be talking about today, we'll first go into talking about culture. We'll look at our backstory for the project, how we implemented things, and we'll do an enrollment demo, and finally talk about the aftermath of what happened. And so, BYOD MDM WTF. We're all IT professionals, so we probably know what these acronyms are. But just to be on the same page, I'll define them. BYOD, we know probably, is bring your own device. It's a trend in the industry where users are bringing their own devices to access company servers, networks, and services. MDM is a mobile device management system, and that's what you would use to manage the devices that people BYO'd. Casper is a MDM system. And WTF, as we probably all know, is the World Taekwondo Federation, the international federation governing the sport of Taekwondo. So for this session, we'll be talking only about iOS in terms of the devices we're managing. Obviously, there are other platforms, other devices. You can even talk about managing laptops as a BYO device, but we're not going into that. So I said we'll talk about culture. A project like this is as much a cultural balancing act as it is a technical challenge. You have overlapping interests, and you have overlapping interests of trust, security, transparency, and the experience of both your users and your administrators. I've put together a sort of example Venn diagram. Hopefully it's readable in the back. I hope so. I think so. And this is not canon. This may not apply to your environment, but they're just examples of the kinds of benefits that different interests might be able to get out of a BYOD system. The organization can get more productivity when their users are using devices to do all their work off-site. The IT department can be ensured that the devices are secured when they've enrolled in an MDM system with their BYOD. The user gets to choose whatever device that he or she would like. And you have some shared benefits, including happy workers, saving money, and a reduced support burden. But of course, as IT professionals in this room, let's focus on the culture of IT. And there is a dark side. We do get a bad rap sometimes, unfortunately. Even though everyone in IT wants what's best for his department and his organization or her users, sometimes goals are misaligned, or software is out of date, or a draconian security policy prevents a new initiative from happening. I feel like the psychology of IT departments of the past continues to affect those of us in the present. So here's some examples that I came up with of IT's dark side using some illustrations from one of our movies at Pixar. IT can be obstructionist. You're only allowed to use the software from this approved list. I don't care what other software you want, you can't use it. IT can be restrictive. You're not allowed to use Facebook on that computer because you're supposed to get real work done here. Well, I mean, depending on the industry, Facebook could be a valuable tool for communication or keeping up with trends. And beyond that, if your users are spending all day on Facebook for personal things, that is more of a management issue than a technical one. And probably we've all heard of the downright alarmist IT department when it comes to security. One example would be requiring users to change their passwords every 90 days with capitals and numbers and symbols. And what's the first thing an average user is going to do when this password change occurs? Write it down on a Post-it note and put it on their monitor. And how secure is that? So at Pixar, we've engaged in user-centric IT since the beginning, or at least for as long as I've been there. It's a new industry buzzword. I've seen references to it and heard references to it recently, and felt very appropriate to put it into this talk. But really, it's the way we've always pursued IT at Pixar. What is user-centric IT? Well, it's working together. Our default is to say yes to our users instead of no, and to plus them instead of plus their ideas instead of disparage them. Our default stance is to trust our users, and we work to create an environment where they trust us. Ultimately, we are sharing a journey, and in user-centric IT, we like to have that sense of all working together and having a common goal. In our case, we and our users are working towards the same goal of putting pixels on the screen. For most users, that means using computer hardware and software and services to make movies. For us in IT, that means doing all the technical stuff around that to enable them. So if any of those sound like childish notions, well, maybe they are. And maybe it's a little bit like living in Andy's room. We all try and work together and trust each other and share. There's another analogy I like to use from one of our other films. And it's that we're all a race team. And the user, in our case, the artist, the technical user, whoever it might be, is the driver. And sometimes drivers do something foolish, granted. But nevertheless, we in IT, as the pit crew, are there to support them no matter what, and just make sure they do their best work by enabling them with our services. So with that, it's really challenging to always say yes, and to always plus and always make the, I don't want to say jump through hoops, but sometimes we jump through hoops. It's challenging to provide such a high level of service. And that high level of service was acknowledged recently by a colleague of ours down at our sister studio in Burbank. Many of you probably recognize Greg Nagel. Oh, apologies. Greg Nagel is he's one of the primary administrators and I guess owners of the Reposado and Monkey tool set. He speaks at conferences, he blogs, he tweets, he's out there. He's a rock star Mac admin, and he's great. So he recently observed one of our meetings just because of our relationship between Pixar and Disney and noted how high our level of service is. It's insanely high. We're always looking for new tools to support that insane level of service, and Casper for MDM supporting BYOD is just such a tool. Okay, so with that backstory, or with that cultural talk, how did we do BYOD? Well, fun fact here, this is a still from the short film Lifted. You probably know we like to put shorts in front of each of our feature films, and Lifted was the short in front of Ratatouille. Ratatouille and Lifted released on the same day as the original iPhone back in 2007. So speaking of going back in time, strictly speaking, Pixar has been supporting BYOD since 2009. Back then, we were seeing the personal use of iPhones skyrocketing. The iPhone configuration utility gave us a method to push out a profile to those phones and make the services such as mail available to our users and their phones. It was rudimentary but functional. Probably many of you have dabbled with that as well. Unfortunately, the user experience with that system, if you even want to call it a system, because it's really not, The user experience is pretty miserable. The enrollment process, the installation process required, in our case, the user to type their username and password 5 individual times for each service that was being configured. Mail, calendar, mail SMTP, secure networking, and VPN, I believe. So what we actually wound up doing was encouraging users to use that first field, which was a username field, to type their password. So they could see that A, they got it correct, and then B, copy it to the clipboard and have it for the subsequent fields coming down the road. One unfortunate thing that we learned about that is that clipboard is preserved on iOS through reboot. So that password was lingered in the clipboard for who knows how long. The other thing we found, of course, is that, as I mentioned, it's not a true system. We weren't truly managing these devices. We were just configuring them. And once they were out there, we had hundreds of them, and we knew very little about them. We couldn't manage them after enrollment. We couldn't lock them, couldn't know what OS they were running, et cetera. But what really gave us traction on moving away from the static profile was go to fail. Earlier this year, in 2014, there was a vulnerability in both iOS and OS X called go to fail. When this occurred, we realized that this was time to move on into a BYO, or into an MDM solution. By doing that, we could then exclude these vulnerable devices from our network, or at the very least, inform users like, hey, go upgrade your software. Okay, so we had go to fail, and we decided that we needed to do something about it. So we formed a team. The MDM BYOD team contains representatives from our Mac and iOS departments, or IT teams, the network and server team, the web team, and IT management. Now we could tackle the project. So, implementation. We wanted, of course, to solve that user experience problem of the typing of usernames and passwords all 17,000 times. Variables became obviously the solution to at least that part of this. Variables in this context are the placeholders that fill in a profile that then bring in information from your LDAP or directory services into the profile and configure the device. So in this case, we have $username is an example variable. And you can maybe see this sort of dark red line here circling where it is in the profile configuration. $username will be substituted by the username that is in the directory services. You'll notice $password doesn't exist here. And that's because there is no $password. So we had we were taking these steps towards getting the variables figured out. Many vendors support variables. Of course, it's kind of built into managing iOS. Jamf supports the variables. And we're already at this point using Casper for managing our Macs, and happily doing so. We were also, though, looking, this is as we were investigating solutions, we also looked at Mobile Iron. Oops, I should have clicked. Mobile Iron takes this idea one step further in an interesting way. When the user authenticates to enroll into the system, the password is cached. This is outside of the password field here. It's not a variable. It's cached by the software there. And what that means is that that password then can be applied to the subsequent profiles at enrollment. And what that means for the user is that it's a very seamless solution. It's one-time login with your username and password, and it configures it, and everything's good to go. It was a really nice experience. So we were debating between these two vendors. We had an internal debate. Great user experience on the one hand, history with Jamf on the other. What did we do? Jamf for the win. It was already such a benefit for us to be able to use the username variable to make this experience better for the users that adding the dollar password was something we were going to be able to live without. And we have, of course, asked Jamf for this feature to be done, of course, in a secure way to cache this password at enrollment temporarily and put it into the profiles as needed. Still waiting, Jake. But yeah, we did have a great history with using Casper for our Macs. We had a good relationship with the Jamf team. The UI is great, and we had seen regular enhancements to the product over time. So we'll hope to see others. What else was going on? Well, as I've been showing images from our films, you probably recognize a lot of them, but many of you may not recognize this one because it is not yet from a released film. It's actually not from a film at all. This is from the Toy Story That Time Forgot, airing on ABC, December 2nd. Set your DVRs. Every project is unique, and so you may have to deal with government oversight, or a vendor's release schedule, or an unqualified contractor gets the job because it's the CEO's nephew. Well, here are some of our unique pressures that we felt. The users, we want to enable our users. Our users are the focus. We're a user-centric environment. We're talking about personal devices. You may remember that our friendly seagulls like to say mine in Finding Nemo. So yeah, we wanted to make sure that with these personal devices, we were as transparent with our communication to our users and that they were comfortable with the solution. Meanwhile, separate from the MDM initiative, our network team was working on a new network. We were going to begin using Aruba ClearPass, and that would move us away from a password-based 8021x network to certificate-based authentication. This was part of the puzzle as well. And the iPhone 6 was coming. We knew that was going to be a deadline of sorts. Once that came out, the users, dozens of them probably, would be wanting to get access to our services. Let's get this done before then. I didn't know they'd be that big. And security, of course, is always a concern. We actually, right around that time that Go to Fail catalyzed our work here on MDM, several user passwords were compromised, and it reinforced our interest in the MDM capabilities so we could deny access to users until they were able to change their password. So one of the biggest pieces to this puzzle, and probably the next several slides will be the most technical of the talk, was figuring out certificates and using the certificate authority. I'm not a security expert. I worked very closely with others, especially on our network team, and figuring it out was the cornerstone of the solution. A certificate authority issues certificates. It's a trusted third party, and some examples would be like VeriSign or GoDaddy. Also, a certificate authority is built into the JSS. Probably most of you have a JSS set up to use the built-in certificate authority. And that's how we had been using ours with our Macs for years. And that works fine. With Macs, you enroll machines and install the Casper binary and the certificate as root or with root access. So you can do that. But in iOS, there's no root access at that level in that way. So the user needs to approve everything. So what the user sees when you enroll into JSS under this scenario is this. This is the first step in installing the profiles and getting enrolled into the MDM system. This is the default behavior. You'll notice, probably, maybe in the back it's hard to see, but there is some red text here and it says not verified. We didn't really like that. This is, and just to be clear, this is installing the certificate that lets the device trust the JSS so that it can be managed further on. But we see this red text, and our users would see this red text, and that's a scary monster. We don't want that. So how could we solve this problem and turn that red text green and make everything verified? Well, you can do it, and there's the other option in the JSS. In setting up the PKI, which I didn't mention earlier, This is the PKI tab of the settings in the JSS. The built-in certificate authority is the default. The external certificate authority is the option. And if you can read it, I'll read it here in case you can't. You check a box that says use external certificate authority, use a SCEP-enabled external CA to issue management certificates to mobile devices. SCEP being the Simple Certificate Enrollment Protocol. So this page, this window, only refers to iOS. If you enable an external certificate authority, it's not going to do anything to your Macs, except when it does, and we'll talk about that. But this is a deceptively simple checkbox. There's much more to this window. It scrolls down. Obviously, this is just a subset of what we do here. And then there's the whole other side of it on the certificate authority server. So that's where this comes in. This was, and I'm going to read here just so I get everything right. But here we see there were 2 steps to our enrollment process, is how we wound up solving this. Step 1 is to install the Wi-Fi profile. The device installs the Wi-Fi profile from ClearPass. ClearPass, its role in this system is to issue profiles that configure the Wi-Fi settings of devices. ClearPass can, in fact, act as its own complete MDM, but we are using it in a more limited way. Like the JSS, ClearPass has a built-in certificate authority which signs its profiles. The trick we found to make everything trusted and verified was to install a trusted code signing certificate onto ClearPass. This is something the JSS doesn't support currently. Maybe we could work on that too. So we install this trusted code signing certificate onto ClearPass, and in our case, it was purchased from GoDaddy. So when a user goes to our enrollment URL and installs the Wi-Fi profile, which includes this publicly trusted certificate, ClearPass is trusted and verified on the device. So Wi-Fi is now installed. The next step is to enroll in the JSS. By now, the device has the ClearPass cert, or certificate authority, installed from the Wi-Fi profile. And as I mentioned in the previous slide, we had configured JSS to use ClearPass as the external CA. So when the user enrolls, the chain of trust between the device, the JSS, and ClearPass is maintained. OK, got through that. So we got that all figured out over time. But what was really great for us that happened in the summer was Casper 9.4. This was huge, and it was really well-timed, just what we needed, because we had that deadline of the iPhone 6s coming. We knew in September to expect all that. There were a couple big bug fixes, and there were some really compelling new features. I know by now, of course, we've gone through Casper 9.5, and Casper 9.6 is out now, but we're still on 9.4, so I'm going to be focusing on that. So Casper 9.4, 2 big bug fixes. Well, what we found was a workaround to one, and one was a showstopper. The iOS inventory bug was a situation where about 20% of our devices would fail to complete enrollment. You would authenticate, get through the system, and actually, the device completes, then the dialogue say you've completed, but the step that's happening to take the inventory report and push it up to the JSS gets delayed. This was, again, in Casper 9.3.2. The only solution for that, the workaround, was send a blink push notification from the JSS. But of course, that's not sustainable when you're having dozens or hundreds of devices, and an administrator can't just go and click send blank push for 20% of them. We were able to automate that solution on our JSS with a script using the API. This was really made possible by my colleague, Chris Lascelles, who is our Mac tech lead at Pixar. Chris will be speaking Thursday about this API access that the really advanced things that he's done with it, including a new open source library that is written in Ruby and allows for some very powerful customizations and command line. Pardon me. Just do this. Much better. Some very powerful customizations, all with the command line access. So that was nice that Chris was able to fix that, or work around it, I should say. What was even nicer was that Jamf fixed the bug. The other one, Mac enrollment, this is where I mentioned the external CA may or may not affect your Macs. Doesn't do that by design, but in Casper 932, for some reason, once you enabled the external CA, your new Macs could not enroll, which was, of course, a showstopper for us with our large Mac population. Also great that Jamf fixed that. New features, they all came out at Casper 9.4. Personal device management. Sounds a lot like BYOD. Sounds like something we'd want to look at. Self-service app instead of a web clip. That's compelling. Customized enrollment messaging. Yes. Android. Maybe. So that was all in the conversation. And then, this is just the step-by-step of what we did. And I'll address some of those new features and what we thought about them as I go through this. But the first thing when you do a project like this, or most anything, is test. If you don't have a development JSS or 2 or 3 in your environment, go do that now. You need to be able to push buttons and break things and whatever without bricking all of your devices, or at the very least being unable to manage them. I've been there. I don't want to be there again, and I don't want you to be there. So the bulk of our testing happened in the external certificate authority space, all of that communication between ClearPass and Casper and nailing that down. The personal device management, as I said, was compelling. It was intriguing, but at this point in Casper 9.4, it did not solve the problem for us. It supported only ActiveSync, Exchange, Mail, and calendaring, and we are using a more standard IMAP and CalDAV for those. Since then, they've added those features, so we will be looking again at the personal device management. Self-service app, also very compelling, allows you to send push notifications to your devices. Pretty interested in that. But we stuck with the web icon solution for that as well. For us, it was a matter of having that self-service app just pop up as soon as machines or devices were enrolled, and all at the same time that other dialogues were popping up, like, oh, type your password for calendar. It all happens so quickly and overlap, and they may type their Pixar password into the Mac App Store or the iOS App Store dialog or vice versa. So we wanted to avoid confusion. So of course, once we had finished testing, we upgraded our production server to 9.4. And like any project, you're going to want to test your services after doing it. This JSS was actively managing 1,500 or more Macs and about 150 iOS devices just that had been in there throughout our summer of testing. Everything was good. We then wanted to, did I jump? Apologies. Yeah, this is bright. Apologies. We then configured the PKI. This is setting up the external certificate authority, talking to ClearPass. This effectively severed the link between the JSS and those 150 devices. And I say test devices, but they were really deployed devices amongst the systems team and various other test candidates. So we wanted to make sure that didn't mean that they lost access to their services. We understood it would mean they would no longer get updates to inventory or be able to send new push notifications or profiles, but at least their mail wouldn't go away and their calendar and everything. So the testing proved that that was the case, and it was OK to do. Once we'd installed our setup there, or configured our external certificate, we checked services again. Could we enroll? Could we manage our Macs and iOS devices? Yes, we could. So now we had an MDM system. Everything was live. But there's more to it than that, especially in a user-centric situation where we want to make sure everything's clear and documented. The next steps were to customize the messaging of the two systems, the ClearPass HTML and the Casper dialogues for both of those enrollment steps. And we also modified the JSS to skip the certificate installation during enrollment. This basically means you don't see that dialog where it says not verified in red, because you're not installing that certificate from Casper, because you don't need it, because you trust your external CA. Finally, we had existing internal documentation on our wiki pages to explain to users how to set up the static profile. And so we just changed that, of course, to talk about the new system. All the web pointers in the intranet would point to it now. And we customized our self-service icon. Nothing wrong with JAMP's icon, but especially for users who aren't familiar with self-service, we don't use it heavily on our Macs even. We just wanted to make sure it was clear that this is a Pixar tool, and you can go here and tap it and see what it does. So we were ready. Let's do a demo. This is a recorded demo. What you're going to see here is a device onboarding to the Aruba ClearPass system, where you authenticate and it installs the network profile. You then continue to Casper, and you authenticate there and enroll into the JSS. And I will say that I recorded this demo several weeks ago. I wished I had time to redo it recently, and I ran out of it. So it's a little long. I had wanted to tighten it up a bit. So apologies for that. I'll talk over it a little bit. This is not the first still of the movie. I just wanted to make sure I pointed it out. And it's something that goes by a little quickly during the movie. This is the customized messaging about what capabilities that Pixar IT have and have not. And one notable change from the built-in JAMF messaging is that we say what we cannot do first, and we bold that, just so people know immediately, like, you can't track me, you can't read my personal stuff. I think that's more important to them than some of the stuff below. OK, let's do the demo. So here we are. We're logging into ClearPass. The customized background is our, am I in people's way? I probably have been in people's way this whole time. I'm going to stand back here for this. You'll notice a long password here. As part of that security breach, we changed our password policy to require more strict passwords. So they're pretty long. We're having users do XKCD-style passwords, which you may know from that comic. And they work great. 4 words. That screen jumped away, but you see it again. Here you see we're verified, all because of that signed by GoDaddy Class 2 certification authority. This installs that CA, and that is what's going to help us be trusted when we enroll in the JSS. Dead air. More customized messaging. Log in here to set up your Pixar email and calendar. You notice we don't even really use the terms MDM or BYOD when messaging and communicating with our users. They don't really know what it means, most of them. They probably don't even care. If we just say, this is how you get your email on your phone, then they're going to understand that. Again, the XKCD-style passwords, if you don't know what I'm talking about, Google XKCD passwords and look at that comic. Here's that messaging I showed you earlier. You access it by tapping that little I that's in the dialog. We wanted to be as transparent as possible. Again, verified. This is what we want. Dialog from Apple. A lot of these dialogues you can't really do much with in terms of customizing. Success. Except, actually, the funny thing about this is that this is the failure message. This was another way we found that we could work towards just making our users' lives easier. At least in this case, well, funny story. We found that about 10 or 20% of our devices enrolling were having this case where they would claim to fail. And we would get the default messaging before we changed it was, you have enrollment failed, try again. And we have changed that because we found that that was not the case. Those devices had not failed. They were enrolled, and everything was successful. So we just changed it to say, hey, you're enrolled. Go confirm that. And if you're not, come back and click start over. So those edge cases where it truly did fail, those could come back and understood what to do. Now, I should probably talk to Jake and the other wonderful people at Jamf about what is actually happening here. But in this case, where we just wanted to get the system going and everything else is happening, and it's a tough thing to nail down, this was a good workaround. So what is the aftermath? How did it go? It went really well. We had what we like to call a soft launch. We did not push it out to users in any way. Not that there's really an easy way to do that. All the users who still had their static profile still had access to services, and we didn't need to remove that immediately. We just made it available to the users with their new iPhones and anyone who needed access to, excuse me. The enrollments numbered about 330 in the first month. And this was all from new iPhones and then word of mouth. And when users had questions, they would, us as administrators, we would point them towards this new system. We had very, very few work requests. Everything was very smooth. Great experience. To sort of double check that I was right and that the great experience was actually the case for the users as well, I did a survey. I solicited feedback by sending a mail to all of the users in the JSS that were associated with a device who had enrolled in those first couple of weeks. 30 responses, not bad considering everyone's too busy to do a survey, I would think. Anyway, they were all really positive. The questions I asked were about our documentation, the transparency of our communication, and whether or not we explained things, and how comfortable users were with the new powers of IT over their personal devices. So here's a few sample responses. The straightforward messaging during enrollment lessened the need for documentation, according to one user. And then on the flip side, the visual cues in the documentation were a huge help. So it goes to show that you certainly have different styles of users. One user was a little concerned, commented that it's the warning was disconcerting, but our customized messaging clarified things and made it more palatable. And on the flip side of that, some people just don't care. But the last comment says it all about the kind of relationship we want to have with our users, and I'll just leave it at that. So what's next for Pixar? Well, in terms of our film slate, Inside Out is releasing June 19th on 2015, and this is a still from that. That will be cool. I've seen early reels of it. It's going to be awesome. Meanwhile, with BYOD, yeah, we'll look at Android. There's some interest in that, although not a lot. But if those users want it, we'll see if we can make it work. BYOD on Macs, I actually have a feature request in Jamf Nation to create a personal device management system for Macs. And you can go to Jamf Nation, look for that feature request. I'm Last Dan Standing, which you'll see in a few slides. But the point is, managing Macs, you can do all the BYOD stuff with policies and profiles and scoping. I mean, the JSS is very, very powerful for all of that. But I have some reasons I think that you can see in the feature request about why it might be valuable. Anyway, in the meantime, we will be using the JSS as is to do BYOD on some Macs. And I'm just remembering Bushel, which in certain cases may be appropriate for if it's a small subset of Macs. This new product that I'm very excited to look at may possibly be that solution as well. And finally, personal device management. This is that iOS device management that came out with 9.4, now more robust in 9.6, and we'll be looking at that. And so that's all I got. Thank you. I guess, we are going to take questions. So forgot about that part. Over here.
Just so we can make sure the recording gets it, I'm going to hand you the microphone.
So was there any other value add to encouraging MDM other than just getting the email? Like, what was your carrot or what was your stick? How did you push people towards the new one? Were they gaining anything other than a different way to set up email?
The documentation talks about that. It's the ability for us to, because we're not using the personal device management, so the ability for us to wipe their device if it's lost or stolen, if they opt in, was compelling to some users, and we mentioned that. I wouldn't say that was huge for folks. So really it was more like we decided to change this system, and we said, hey, we're doing this new system, here's how it works, please opt in. Over there.
Hi. Do you have offices outside the US, and how do you deal with remote wiping of personal data?
So we do not have offices outside the US. And that's a thing. Certainly we're in a situation where our environment is unique. A lot of our story may not apply to more strict environments, overseas environments, education environments.
I may have actually missed it during the presentation, but I was interested to find out how you pushed out the initial policy for ClearPass, obviously to do the certificate trust right at the beginning, obviously before you had enrolled it into the JSS.
Okay, so it's very similar, really. We have a URL. The URL is open via port forwarding from multiple networks. So they don't need access to our secure network to get to the ClearPass server that deploys that profile. So we just point them there in Safari, and then you follow the steps. Over here, or? Okay, over here.
Hey, do you have any documentation on how you customize the message that the users were seeing when they enrolled?
I do not. I bet there's stuff all over Jamf Nation. It is in the 9.4 and above. It's in the management. I believe it's not mobile management, but the global management, because it applies to both OS X and iOS. And you dig down into there and edit the messaging components. There's multiple tabs, and it uses is it markup or markdown? Markdown, which is a really thin way to format text with an asterisk indicating bold or whatever, and URLs are available. Okay. Anyone here?
If you could estimate how much of your mobile fleet is Android versus iOS. I ask because about 75% of my mobile personal devices are iOS. Mm-hmm. I'd love to do something like this. I already have the tools. I have Casper in place, but I'd feel like I'm leaving my Android people out if I moved forward with iOS first. Did you feel like that?
We did not. I think, and I don't know this, our numbers are probably 90+% iOS. We never supported Android in the same way that we did with our static profile for iOS. So there's really, those Android users, they don't have mail profiles or network profiles. And with the built-in abilities now to manage some Android devices in Casper, I think that maybe you might be able to do it. It depends, I think, on which devices that your users are using. I don't know, does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Over here.
You mentioned that you guys are doing or investigating BYOD for Mac. How far along are you guys?
We have a working model. I can enroll using user-initiated enrollment, and there's a package to download, and then it has a narrower scope of management than our more traditional Pixar-owned Macs. There are things, and if we were going to be doing things off-site, which you would imagine those devices, those Macs would be, we need to work on some network communication there. But on-site, we can make it work now.
Do you deploy VPN profiles to your BYOD devices?
We do. Yep.
And so there was no pushback from your information security about something like that?
No, and again, the VPN was even built into the static profile for several years. I think that because of the limitations with iOS, we felt comfortable with the fact that there was less of a chance for someone to do malicious things with that device, with that VPN access. Our Macs, again, we're investigating BYOD on the Macs, but that is one concern, is the much more powerful tools available on Macs to do harm.
Is your JSS or your set of JSSs, are they accessible from the internet?
They are for limited access.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
What content are you making available via your rebranded self-service app for your
We have
devices?
we have not pushed out. We have not used this. Oh, okay. So I did rebrand just the logo. That's all.
What kind of content are you making available to them via that versus
Right.
having them use the App Store?
Well, recently, I don't know if it was with 9.4, if that was maybe a feature I forgot to mention, or if it's 9.5. Configuration profiles can be made available through self-service. So if we want to give them a web clip, we can make a profile that installs a web clip. As proof of concept, we have done that. That's in our self-service now. But we really aren't there yet. We want to have it installed so it's there for users. And we expect to do more with it, especially as we sort of ramp up with VPP and installing apps there. We're not there. Really, our management it's kind of limited. I mean, what we're done is we've recreated what we did in the static profile, the mail, the network, and the calendar settings, all that. And sort of next steps are going to be looking at what else we can do with things like self-service. Going once. Oh, over here.
Okay, this is a highly technical question. What is the backstory behind Last Stand Standing?
Well, the backstory of that was one year it came to me that would be a cool name for my fantasy football team. And it was. And then I went with it, and it's now my handle at whatever web services I can come across. Unfortunately, I didn't get Twitter in time, but I have several others. Going twice. Gone. Thank you.